Hey, um, welcome to day 7 of Holy Week, which is typically known as Holy Saturday. Um, it'll be quite short today because, similar to Wednesday, Saturday is a day that we're not told much about. There is a little bit in the Bible that speaks of what happened on Saturday after Jesus' death, so we'll take a look at that together. But today, really, Holy Saturday is about grief. It's about grief over what happened to Jesus, similar to Good Friday. It's a day when we can kind of rest and reflect. So I invite you to, as we consider this, just to rest, to reflect, to consider the events of what has gone before in preparation for tomorrow. But let's talk about Holy Saturday and what happened on those days. So, well, the only thing that we're told by the Bible about what happened on Saturday, which was the Sabbath, is an account of what the Pharisees did and how the guards were set up around Jesus' tomb. Here's an account from Matthew speaking to that. This is in Matthew 27, verse 62. The next day, which followed the preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that while this deceiver was still alive, he said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give orders that the tomb be made secure until the third day. Otherwise his disciples may come, steal him, and tell the people, 'He has been raised from the dead,' and the last deception will be worse than the first." "You have a guard of soldiers," Pilate told them. "Go and make it as secure as you know how." They went and secured the tomb by setting a seal on the stone and placing the guard. So what happens on Saturday, basically, it's the Sabbath, and so no one's allowed to work. Remember that on Friday, Jesus died around 3 p.m., which would be the ninth hour of the day, and there was a rush to get Jesus down from the cross and buried. He was buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb by Joseph and by Nicodemus. And on Saturday, the Pharisees remember that Jesus had spoken he would rise again after 3 days. Now, it's interesting because the disciples don't even seem to remember that he said this at his death, right? But the Pharisees remember it, and they believe that it's going to be a deception. They think that the disciples will steal the body and make it appear as though Jesus has risen from the dead, even though he is actually still dead. So what they do is they approach the Roman governor Pilate and say, "We want a guard to be able to protect the tomb." And we're told a couple of things. First of all, we're told that they do get their guards to guard the tomb. And so Roman soldiers would have been placed outside of the tomb. Now, Jewish tombs as well, the way that they worked was usually it was cut into the side of a rock. There would be a gateway cut into the side of a rock into a cave-like area. And then they would have, to prevent things like smell and different things, they would have a huge circular stone that could be rolled. And it would be rolled, sealing the entrance of the tomb. And you can see various pictures of these online if you were to Google that. But what the Jewish leaders did additionally to make sure that no one could get in and steal the body was they placed a seal on the tomb. So what that means is most likely there was ropes placed around that circular stone to secure it, and then a wax seal placed on it by the soldiers, so that if anyone moved the stone, the wax seal would be broken and it would be seen. So there we have it. We have a stone, a pretty huge stone. It would take several men to move it, probably with some leverage as well. And we have a seal set on it, and then soldiers set outside the tomb. So the Pharisees were really nervous about what Jesus had said, and they were really nervous that the disciples would try and make it look as though what Jesus said had come true. Of course, we know that what Jesus said was going to come true, and we'll get to that tomorrow. But they were really nervous about it, and so they wanted to secure the tomb. Now, as for the disciples themselves, here's what we know about them on Saturday. We know that all of them abandoned him. John was the only one that was at the cross. The female disciples, the women disciples, they were there at the cross. His mother was at the cross. But I would imagine that all of them are in terrible grief on Saturday. They've just seen their best friend, their master, the one that they thought was the Messiah, die. And so they are probably in hiding on Sabbath, worried for their own lives. Peter himself denied Jesus because of he was afraid of what would happen to him if he was associated with Jesus. The rest of the disciples had scattered. And so they're probably just trying to figure out what to do with their life now that this journey they've been on for the last 3 years has seemingly come to an end. So we know that despite the Pharisees' fears, we have nothing to suggest that the disciples were planning anything like that, or that were emboldened by Jesus' death. If anything, they were made fearful by it. They scattered, they left him, they abandoned him. And so we'll see what happens, but that is Holy Saturday. Now, we all have different reactions to what happens on Good Friday. Everyone in the world has a reaction to it. Some of us believe that it was truly Good Friday, that it was Jesus rescuing us. But then everybody in the world is making a decision about it one way or the other. Either you believe that what Jesus did on the cross was something sent by God for us, or you believe it was just another man hanging on another cross, dying another death. And Saturday is really the time when we figure out which one we're going to be. Are we going to react against it, that perhaps we think it's all myth like the Pharisees, that it was just an elaborate hoax? Are we going to run in fear from it because we think it doesn't really mean anything like the disciples? Or are we going to wait in expectation? Are we going to wait to see what will happen on Sunday? I encourage you to think about where your heart is at and what you think about Sunday, and what you think about Friday as well, for that matter. Because we are now in the in-between. We're in the in-between of Jesus doing something that seemed so confusing and so horrible. And of course, the explanation of it and the celebration of it on Sunday. So I invite you to consider those things. But that's Holy Saturday. We'll be back one more time tomorrow to look at the 8th day, the new week, the start of a new week, which is, of course, Resurrection Sunday. So we'll see you there tomorrow. Probably at a slightly earlier time than 6 p.m. So just be keeping a lookout for it if you're following these. But thanks again for joining us, and prayer blessings on you for this Easter.